Your electricity bill went up again, not because you used more power, not because your appliances got less efficient, not because anything changed in your house. It went up because the people who control your power supply needed it to go up, and there is nothing in the system you were given that lets you do anything about it except pay. You are connected to a grid that was designed in the 1880s, improved marginally over the following century, and handed to you as the only option. And every month you send them money for electricity that, if one man's work had not been buried for over 100 years, you might be pulling directly from the air above your own roof for free. That man was Nikola Tesla. And I want to be clear before I go any further that I am not talking about the mythology that has grown up around Tesla online, the perpetual motion claims, the free energy machines, the theories that stretch far beyond what the physics supports. I am talking about something specific that Tesla actually built, actually patented, and actually demonstrated working. A device for capturing atmospheric electrical energy and converting it into usable current. A device so simple that the core components cost $8 at any hardware store today. And a device that the electrical utility industry, which was in the process of building $100 billion infrastructure predicated on your permanent dependence on their grid, had every reason in the world to make sure you never heard about. I'm Mr. Hope, and this is Gaia Lost Vault. What we do here is pull back the curtain on knowledge that was buried not because it stopped working, but because it threatened the wrong people's revenue. Stay with me through this one, because the history is important, the physics is real, and what you can actually build from this today is something I want to walk you through in detail before we're done. Before we talk about what Tesla built, I need to explain something about the atmosphere that most people were never taught, because without it, the device sounds like magic, and it is not magic. It is physics that has been documented, measured, and confirmed for over a century. The Earth and the upper atmosphere form a giant electrical capacitor. The ground carries a negative charge. The ionosphere, the layer of charged particles roughly 60 miles above the surface, carries a positive charge. The difference in electrical potential between the ground and the ionosphere is somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 volts on a fair weather day. This is not a static charge that just sits there doing nothing. It is an active electrical field with current flowing through it continuously. Physicists call it the global atmospheric electrical circuit. It has been measured, mapped, and studied since the 1800s. It is not controversial. It is basic atmospheric science. On a fair weather day, the voltage gradient near the surface of the Earth is approximately 100 volts per meter of altitude. That means the air 1 meter above your head is 100 volts more positive than the ground you're standing on. The air 10 meters above your head is 1,000 volts more positive. The air at the top of a 30-meter tree is 3,000 volts more positive than the ground beneath it. This voltage gradient is present everywhere on the planet's surface at all times, night and day, in every season, in every weather condition except during active thunderstorm cells, where it temporarily reverses. This is free energy in the most literal sense. It is not an exotic claim. It is a measurable physical reality that has been documented in physics textbooks since the 19th century. The question that Tesla asked, and that a handful of researchers since him have asked, is not whether this energy exists. It clearly does. The question is whether it can be captured and used at a practical scale. And the answer, as Tesla's own experiments showed, is yes, with significant caveats about scale and voltage conversion that I am going to be honest with you about. But yes, Tesla began his atmospheric electricity experiments in the 1890s, while he was already famous for his work on alternating current. His first serious investigation of atmospheric power capture was conducted at his Colorado Springs laboratory in 1899, the same laboratory where he produced the most dramatic electrical demonstrations in the history of the field. The Colorado Springs notes, which were published posthumously, describe in detail his experiments with what he called the magnifying transmitter, and his attempts to tap the electrical energy of the Earth ionosphere system. These are not lost documents or secret records. They are published scientific history. But the specific device I want to talk about today is not the magnifying transmitter, which was large and expensive. It is a much simpler invention that Tesla developed in the early 1900s and described in his 1901 patent, U.S. Patent number 685957, titled Apparatus for the Utilization of Radiant Energy. I want you to go look up that patent number if you doubt any of what I'm about to describe, because it is publicly available in the United States Patent and Trademark Office database. Everything I am about to tell you is in that document. The apparatus Tesla described in patent 685,957 consists of three components: an insulated metal plate elevated as high as possible in the open air, a second metal plate buried in the ground, and a capacitor connected between them through a circuit that includes a mechanism for discharging the accumulated charge as usable current. That is the entire device: an elevated collector, a ground connection, and a capacitor. Here is how it works. The elevated plate is exposed to the atmospheric electrical field. Because the atmosphere is more positive than the ground, and because the elevated plate is connected through the circuit to the grounded plate, charge accumulates on the elevated plate. The capacitor stores this charge until it reaches a threshold, then discharges it through the circuit. In a complete system, this discharge can be used to power a load. Tesla described using it to operate motors and other electrical devices. The voltages involved at small scales are real but modest. A 1 square meter aluminum plate elevated 10 meters above the ground in fair weather will accumulate charge at a rate that produces a small but measurable current. The voltage is high, the current is low. The power output at small scale is not enough to run your refrigerator. I want to be honest about that, because there is a lot of misinformation online about Tesla atmospheric devices that wildly overstates what a simple home installation produces. What a small device reliably produces is enough low-power current to charge capacitors, run small sensors, power LED indicators, maintain the charge on a battery backup system over time, or operate very low-drain electronics. That is real and useful. It is not your whole house. But here is where the history gets interesting, and where the industry suppression story becomes documented rather than speculative. In 1901, the same year Tesla filed patent 685957, he was in advanced negotiations with J.P. Morgan, the most powerful financier in America, to fund a much larger version of this system. Morgan had already invested $150,000, equivalent to roughly $5 million today, in Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower project on Long Island. Tesla's stated goal for Wardenclyffe was a world wireless system that would transmit both communications and electrical power through the Earth and atmosphere simultaneously, available to any receiver on the planet's surface for free. Morgan's question, which has been cited in correspondence that is part of the historical record, was direct. He asked Tesla where he could put the meter. How do you charge people for power they pull out of the air? Tesla reportedly had no satisfying answer. And in 1903, Morgan cut off funding for the Wardenclyffe project entirely. Without Morgan's money, Tesla could not complete the tower. He spent the next decade trying to attract new investors and failed. In 1917, the Wardenclyffe Tower was demolished. Tesla died in 1943 in a New York hotel room, largely forgotten by the scientific establishment he had transformed. His papers immediately seized by the United States government upon his death, and classified for several years before being released to the Tesla Museum in Belgrade. The suppression of Tesla's atmospheric power work was not a dramatic conspiracy with secret meetings and deliberate book burnings. It was something quieter, and in some ways more effective. It was the withdrawal of capital from research that threatened an existing investment. Morgan had put his money into the electrical grid. A system that let people pull power from the atmosphere would make that grid less necessary. The rational financial decision was to stop funding the alternative. And when the most powerful money in America stops funding your research stops. It does not need to be declared illegal. It does not need to be actively suppressed. It just stops receiving the resources it needs to continue, and it fades out of the mainstream while the funded alternative, the grid, continues to develop and entrench itself over the following century. This is exactly what happened to passive cooling knowledge, to traditional soil management, to dozens of other fields of practical knowledge that this channel has documented. The suppression is almost never dramatic. It is almost always financial. Fund what makes money. Starve what threatens money. Wait a generation. The knowledge disappears from common practice, survives only in obscure patents and the work of independent researchers, and is eventually dismissed as fringe by the very institutions that were built on the alternative the original knowledge threatened. I want to tell you now about what happened after Tesla, because this is not a story that ends in 1943 with his death. Other researchers picked up the atmospheric electricity thread, and some of their work produced results that are documented and significant. In the 1960s and 1970s, a researcher named Hermann Plausen, a Baltic German inventor, conducted extensive experiments with atmospheric electricity collectors and published results claiming power outputs of several kilowatts from large, elevated collector arrays. Plausen's work described collector systems using balloons to elevate metal mesh collectors to altitudes of several hundred feet, where the voltage gradient is substantially higher than its surface level. His 1920 patent, U.S. patent number 1,540,998, describes the system in detail and is also publicly available. The power outputs he described for large-scale elevated collectors are significantly higher than what a surface-level installation produces and begin to enter the range of practical household use. In the 1990s, researchers at several universities began investigating the practical limits of atmospheric energy harvesting using modern materials. A team at MIT published work in 2020 demonstrating that carbon nanotube arrays could harvest energy from atmospheric moisture gradients continuously, day and night. Researchers at the University of Campinas in Brazil published a 2010 paper in the journal Langmuir demonstrating that water microparticles in the atmosphere carry electrical charge that can be harvested by exposed surfaces. The Chinese Academy of Sciences published work in 2022 on triboelectric nanogenerators that harvest atmospheric energy at scales approaching practical use. None of this research made mainstream news. None of it was fast-tracked into commercial development. The academic papers exist, and you can find them. The commercial investment is not happening because the entities with the capital to develop atmospheric energy harvesting at scale are the same entities whose existing infrastructure would be devalued by its widespread adoption. Now I want to walk you through the actual device, the $8 version, what it is, what it genuinely produces, and how to build it. Because I think knowledge should be practical, not just historical. And I want you to be able to put your hands on this and see for yourself that the physics is real. The components you need are the following: a sheet of aluminum flashing, approximately 1 square foot. This is available at any hardware store in the roofing section and costs $2 to $3 for a small piece. A length of insulated copper wire, 20 to 30 feet, which you likely already have or can get for a few dollars. A ceramic or film capacitor in the range of 1 to 10 microfarads, available at any electronics supplier or salvaged from old electronics, cost essentially $0 to $1. A ground rod or connection to an existing ground, which, if your house has a grounding electrode system already installed, costs nothing to connect to. And a simple LED circuit or small voltage meter to demonstrate the charge accumulation, costs $2 to $3 at most. The assembly is straightforward. Mount the aluminum plate outdoors, as high as you can practically manage, on a roof edge, on a pole, on a fence post, anywhere elevated and exposed to open sky. Connect the insulated wire from the plate down to your capacitor. Connect the other terminal of the capacitor to your ground connection. Connect your LED or meter across the capacitor. What you will observe depends on conditions. On a clear, dry day with low humidity, the charge accumulation is relatively fast, and the voltage across the capacitor builds measurably within minutes. On a humid day, the moisture in the air partially conducts the charge away before it accumulates, and the effect is slower. At night, the atmospheric gradient is still present but slightly reduced. During an approaching storm, the gradient intensifies dramatically, and your collector will charge faster than at any other time, though you should disconnect and ground the system before a thunderstorm reaches your location. This device is not a lightning rod and should not be treated as one. A thunderstorm cell directly overhead produces voltages that are millions of times larger than the fair weather gradient, and no small capacitor will handle that safely. What you are observing when the LED flickers or the meter registers is not a trick. It is not static electricity from handling the components. It is the atmospheric electrical gradient, the same field that Tesla measured in Colorado Springs in 1899. The same field documented in every atmospheric physics textbook, doing exactly what the physics says it should do. Converting the potential difference between the elevated plate and the ground into accumulated charge that can be discharged as current. The practical path from this demonstration device to meaningful power output requires scaling up the collector area, elevating it higher to access stronger gradients, and using voltage conversion circuitry to bring the high voltage, low current output of the atmospheric collector into the voltage and current ranges that modern electronics use. None of that technology is exotic. Voltage conversion is a solved engineering problem. The challenge is scale and the economics of competing against a century of grid infrastructure investment. But here's what I want you to think about. The people who made the decision not to develop this further are not physicists weighing technical merit. They are investors and utility executives weighing return on existing capital. The physics does not care about their balance sheets. The atmospheric gradient will be there tomorrow morning, whether or not anyone has found it convenient to harness it. And the number of independent researchers quietly working on this problem in garages and university labs around the world is larger than it has ever been, because the information that was once suppressed by controlling access to publication and funding is now available to anyone with an internet connection and the curiosity to look. That is exactly the situation I find myself in with the research I've been doing for this channel. Going back to primary sources, finding the patents, reading the original notebooks, cross-referencing the suppression pattern across different fields of practical knowledge. And what I keep finding is the same story, told in different technical vocabularies. Knowledge that works, knowledge that threatens a revenue stream, knowledge that gets starved of resources and reframed as fringe, and knowledge that survives in the margins, waiting for someone to look at it again, without the filter of a financial interest telling them what to see. I've been collecting what I find in written form, because videos disappear and algorithms change, and I want this knowledge to exist somewhere more permanent than a platform owned by people who may one day find it inconvenient. The work I've put together on traditional growing knowledge, on plant medicine that the pharmaceutical industry has spent a century trying to make you forget, on the Amish agricultural practices that fed communities for generations without a single purchased input. That work is in a series of books under the Gaia Lost Vault name. The first volume covers the Amish garden secrets that the agricultural industry buried when chemical farming became profitable. The second volume is what I call the backyard pharmacy, the healing plants that grew in every traditional community's garden before the drug industry decided that healing should require a prescription and a monthly copay. If you want to go deeper than what a video can hold, that's where the deeper record is. You'll find it at the Gaia Lost Vault channel store. I mention it once and I'll leave it at that. Let me come back to Tesla, because there is one more piece of the history I want to give you that most people who talk about Tesla never mention. And it is the piece that I think is most important for understanding why this knowledge matters right now. In the last years of his life, after the Wardenclyffe project had failed and his funding had dried up, Tesla gave a series of lectures and interviews in which he described what he saw as the fundamental problem with how human civilization was approaching energy. He said the Earth is not a dead rock. It is a charged body moving through a charged medium. The energy available in the electromagnetic environment of this planet is vastly larger than what we are burning fossil fuels to produce. The reason we are burning fossil fuels is not that we have no alternative. It is that the alternative cannot be metered. That statement, which appears in various forms across multiple Tesla interviews from the 1930s, is the precise description of what happened to his work and what continues to happen to any energy research that points toward abundance rather than dependency. The grid is not just infrastructure, it is a metering system. It is the mechanism by which energy is converted from a physical phenomenon that exists in the world into a commodity that can be owned and sold. The atmospheric electrical field cannot be owned. It cannot be metered. Every human being on the surface of this planet is sitting at the bottom of an ocean of electrical potential that no corporation can fence off and charge admission to. And that is exactly why the research that would let you access it has never received the development investment that coal, oil, gas, and nuclear have received. I want to say something about the broader pattern because I think it is the most important thing this channel does. It is not specifically about gardens or mosquito control or cooling systems or electrical devices. It is about recognizing a consistent historical pattern in which practical knowledge that empowers ordinary people to meet their own needs without purchasing anything gets systematically defunded, reframed as unscientific, and eventually forgotten. And recognizing that the forgetting is not an accident. The Amish garden knowledge that keeps pests away without pesticides, the passive cooling systems that kept houses comfortable before the AC industry needed your business, the healing plants that European and American communities used for centuries before the pharmaceutical industry decided that plant medicine was competition, the atmospheric electrical research that Tesla and others conducted before the utility grid needed to entrench its infrastructure. These are not separate stories. They are the same story told in different fields. And the thread that connects them is always the same. The knowledge works. Someone with money to protect decided it was inconvenient. The knowledge was suppressed not through dramatic action, but through the quiet withdrawal of resources and the patient work of reframing it as primitive, as unscientific, as something a modern person has no use for. You have use for it. That is why you are here. That is why this channel exists. And that is why the work of finding these buried threads and pulling them back into the light is something I intend to keep doing. Let me give you the practical summary before I let you go, because I always want to leave you with something you can actually do. This week, look up United States Patent 685,957 in the patent database. Read the original document. It is written in plain English, and it is not long. What you will see is a working inventor describing a real device with real components in the year 1901. Then, look up Herman Plausen's 1920 patent, number 1,540,998. Read that one too. Then, go build the $8 demonstration version I described. Elevated aluminum plate, insulated wire, capacitor, ground connection, LED or meter. Put it up on a dry, clear day and watch what happens. Not because the $8 version is going to power your house, but because seeing the physics work with your own hands, with your own components, bought from your own hardware store, is something that no amount of official dismissal can take away from you. Once you've seen it work, you will look at the atmospheric electricity research differently. You will look at the Tesla history differently. You will look at your electricity bill differently. And you will understand in a way that is deeper than anything I can tell you why the knowledge was buried and why digging it back up is worth the effort. That is what Gaia Lost Vault is for. The knowledge exists. It has always existed. It is waiting for people with enough curiosity to go find it and enough stubbornness to refuse to accept that what makes money is the same as what is true. Drop in the comments what you find when you look up those patents. Tell me if you build the device and what your results are. Tell me what conditions you were in, what weather, what elevation, what materials. That record matters. Your results matter. The picture of what is actually possible gets clearer every time one more person runs the experiment instead of just watching someone else describe it. I'll see you in the next one.